Welcome back. After 4 years, we have a new Battlefield game on the horizons. But unlike last time, it's met with overwhelmingly positive reviews, surprising old and new fans alike. Going back to its roots, it tries to capture the feeling of the older titles, such as Battlefield 3 and 4, and doing so successfully. With its improved gameplay, also come better graphics. With such an action-packed title, it's important to have a stable frame rate so you don't miss any shots due to lag. But you also might not want to look at blurry and glitchy visuals. And that's exactly what this video is about. We're going to glance over the graphical settings of Battlefield 6. We'll also test each graphical preset with my setup to see how each preset holds up frame rate wise. Knowing all that, let's start with the settings themselves. This section is simply about testing out each setting, what it changes, and how much it affects FPS. There are a few things I would like to mention. One is that this was recorded during the first weekend of the open beta, meaning that some settings might behave differently during the second weekend or the final version. Keep that in mind. Second thing that I want to mention is that this game required the newest version of drivers at launch. If I didn't install them, the game would simply refuse to launch. So people with older cards or those that rather stay on older drivers, you're out of luck for now. The last detail that caught my attention and will be visible during the benchmark portion of this video is that currently the game is internally limiting the frame rate to 120 FPS. Yes, I tried turning off the limiter or setting it to 240 FPS, but it was still stuck on 120 FPS. And yes, VSync was also turned off. I believe this will certainly get fixed, but it should be noted. We'll first start with the advanced section, since there are fewer options to take care of. Fixed resolution scale simply lowers the internal resolution that the 3D world renders at, while all of the 2D elements, like the HUD, remain at the original resolution. This is preferred over just lowering the main resolution because it keeps all of the icons and text at their proper resolution. If it's necessary, use it, but you'll be at a disadvantage in terms of overall clarity and being able to see enemies properly. Dynamic resolution scale works on the same principle, but like the name mentions, it dynamically changes the internal resolution so that in combat scenarios, your frame rate doesn't fluctuate, while in less intensive scenarios, your game is as sharp as it can possibly be. I'll skip all of the upscaling settings and frame gen since that's out of the scope for this video. But I do have other videos where I go over these settings in other titles. Yes, I realize that different games might have a slightly different implementation and version of each upscaler, but the idea should be clear enough anyway. The last normal setting is anti-aliasing. Without it enabled, the game is very sharp and performs the best, but the image quality can be slightly problematic. A lot of jagged edges appear and there are lines flickering on the screen. TAA is very cheap and fixes a lot of the problems with image quality, but it introduces new issues. The image becomes very soft, which is noticeable especially at lower resolutions. Since it's temporal, the image quality also gets worse with movement, since it's fixing the aliasing using previous frames. DLAA is Nvidia's anti-aliasing, derived from DLSS. FSR is AMD's, and then XeSS is Intel's. Each have a slightly different look, nothing too drastic or different. Interestingly, FSR took the most VRAM out of all of them, though it does perform better than the two other alternatives. With that, we can quickly check out the post-processing effects that are available. We have the vignette, which is basically a PNG overlay of an effect that happens to lenses in real life. Chromatic aberration, another real-life effect that happens to lenses, in which different colors of light don't focus on the same point. And lastly, film grain, which in this game is so minute, I don't know if I'm actually looking at it or the slight changes are just the graphics flickering. All of these combined are pretty light, with the vignette being the lightest on performance. Personally though, I'll play without them for the best image quality. The last post-processing effect is motion blur. Like in Call of Duty, they separated it into two different parts. One is for the gun view model and the other for the world. For the small cost, it adds a lot to the feeling of the game. I like it very much, though others might disagree. But for the remainder of this video, both versions will be disabled for image quality reasons. Finally, we're going to check out the main part of the graphics settings, starting with texture quality. Even though this isn't mentioned in the description, changing this setting requires a restart, similarly to the texture filtering setting. Weirdly, if you just change to a preset that has a different setting than what you already have loaded, it's completely fine and you don't have to restart. Clearly, this is some jankiness that hopefully gets fixed. Now to the actual changes. To me, it seems to change the texture streaming characteristics, where low tries to respect your memory limit a lot more for better performance, at the cost of image quality. High tries to give you the best textures possible within your memory budget, sometimes at the detriment of overflowing the VRAM, though the behavior might differ on cards with more memory. Texture filtering should make textures clearer at longer distances or at weird angles, though in this game I've found it made little to no difference. Mesh quality is basically changing the LOD, or level of distance. Higher the setting, the more detailed the objects become at longer distances, or at what distances should non-essential objects appear. Hold on just a moment. Personally, I believe it makes a small difference in quality, so you can keep it at low. Terrain quality is as the name implies. It affects how detailed the terrain is. Essentially, how bumpy it becomes. In normal gameplay, it's barely noticeable. If you plan on being on the ground all of the time, then you might want to put it at the higher preset. Otherwise, just keep it at low. Undergrowth basically makes zero difference to my eyes. The only thing I noticed changing was this rock. Otherwise, nothing was changing. Maybe it makes a bigger difference at larger distances, but I didn't notice anything. Effects quality changes how many particles appear and how complex each effect is. From explosions to gunshots, it affects how punchy they look. Though it does come at a cost. I can imagine that in huge gunfights it has a massive performance cost, so I would rather stick to low for better performance. Volumetric quality affects the quality of fog and God rays. Higher the setting, higher the setting, higher the resolution of such effects. What I noticed most was that with high and ultra, God rays were more noticeable than on the low preset. Otherwise, nothing too interesting. Next up is lighting quality. This is another setting that I had trouble finding anything for. From what I gathered, it seems to slightly change the brightness of lights and how the ambient lighting bounces around. Local light and shadow quality does have a pretty big impact on the shadow quality of indoor lights, that shadow cast. The biggest jump in quality was honestly visible in the shooting range. Otherwise, I had a hard time finding places that even had lights like these. Sun shadow quality had the biggest differences, from the pixelated mess that is the low quality preset to the ultra setting. I think I don't have to say too much on this. Preferably play at least at the medium quality preset. Shadow filtering gets enabled only at medium or higher sun shadow quality, but it handles the look of the shadows. More specifically, how diffused or sharp they become depending on the distance they are currently casting from. While the effect is cool, it's not necessary for good image quality. Some might prefer the crispy shadows, and others might prefer the more realistic approach to shadow rendering. It's up to you. Reflection quality is mainly about at what resolution should the static reflections render at. This is used for lighting data, but also as a fallback where SSR can do its work. Since this game is pretty gritty, there aren't many places where you can even see the reflections properly. But I did find this one room with a very reflective surface, and another place with this car windshield. I've mentioned SSR already, so let's take a look at it. When turned off, the game relies only on the static reflections. meaning that only what was already in the level is visible, and anything dynamic, like flares or explosions, don't show up in the reflections. That's where this setting comes in. Not only is it higher res, but it also reflects completely everything in the scenery. Of course, it's not perfect, it only works in screen space, meaning that anything that is out of direct view will not show up. Post-processing, I didn't notice anything, but I might be wrong, so maybe just skip this setting. The SSAO and GI setting also makes a pretty noticeable difference in image quality. Having it turned off, the world is pretty flat without it, especially objects that are in the shade. GTAO is ambient occlusion only, meaning that it will only create fake shadows, while SSGI also alters the lighting by handling global illumination, meaning that it will shade objects depending on the surrounding lights and materials. Although the differences between high and low variants of each technique aren't noticeable. Also, both techniques are only screen space, meaning that they can only shade using what's visible on the screen, similarly to SSR. High fidelity object amount is another setting that I didn't notice any differences with, so I would just keep it at low. We're almost done with the settings. The last thing we have to go over is the performance preset. This almost feels like a leftover from the console versions, but it at least does work. It does reset your settings into auto. It changes settings on the fly, depending on if you want more performance in the heat of the battle, or rather keep the visuals higher quality, just like the setting says. As you can see, it doesn't do the best job in the world, so it's better if you set everything up yourself. And that's it. We can finally move on to the benchmarks. Just so you know, here are the specs we're testing with this game. I'll be testing each preset at 1080p, 1440p, and 2160p without upscaling. Also, I would like to remind you, just in case, that the game is stuck at 120 FPS and I can't seem to change it. Another thing is that the statistics you'll see are captured while I'm not recording, meaning that it's as accurate as it can possibly be. Unlike in the footage, where there's a small penalty in the recorded frame rate. With all of that mentioned, let's go into the benchmarks.
Enemy forces have captured Charlie. Drop them! Under control. Look out! Be advised, objective Charlie has been seized by hostiles. Our lead is secured. Take this objective. The enemy have secured objective Alpha. Objective Charlie is being captured by hostiles.
And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like and check out my other content, either my other benchmarks or my hardware content. And with that, see ya.